welcome to the Arsenal Women Arsecast on Arseblog.com, coming at you with part 2 of our Olympic Games preview. If you didn't catch part 1, don't worry, you don't actually have to listen to these podcasts sequentially. You can listen to part 2 first if you like. But we did put out a podcast earlier this week where myself and Alex Ibaceta talked to Anne-Marie Posma, who is a correspondent for the Netherlands women's team, and we spoke with her a little bit about Vivian Miedema, Danielle van der Donk, Gilles Roord, and overall Netherlands' chances of winning the gold in the Tokyo Olympics. And then Alex and I also spoke with Samantha Lewis, who is a correspondent for the Matildas, the Australian women's team. And again, we spoke a bit about Leah Williamson, Steph Catley, Caitlin Ford, and just overall the kind of year to 18 months the Matildas have had during COVID, and again, their chances in Tokyo. So if you're interested in checking that out, we put that out on Tuesday this week. But this is part 2, where we will look at the other 2 teams who have Arsenal interest at the Tokyo Olympics. So in the first half, myself and Pippa speak to Rich Laverty, who writes for Our Game magazine and These Football Times about women's football. He's also the media officer for Sheffield United Women. And we talk to him about Team GB, their chances at the Olympics, Hege Riise and her kind of temporary interim reign at the moment. And obviously we talk about Leah Williamson, we talk about Lotte Wubben-Moy, we talk about Nikita Parris, and we talk about the fairly surprise exclusion of Jordan Nobbs and Beth Mead from that squad. And then in part 2, I will be talking to Sean Carroll. Now, Sean Carroll is a British journalist who is based in Tokyo. And he covers the J League and the WE League, the Women's Empowerment League in Japan. And we have a broader conversation maybe about what it's like on the ground in Tokyo at the moment. A lot of apprehension there. It's going to be a very different Olympic Games this time around because of COVID. Some of his challenges trying to cover it as a journalist. But then we also talk about Japan's chances. Now, of course, Japan were World Cup winners in 2011 and silver medalists in 2016. So they have a really, really good pedigree. And we talk about their chances of winning the Olympics on home soil, perhaps some of the challenges that the players will experience in their competing in their COVID bubbles, etc. And then, of course, we talk about Mana Iwabuchi, the new Arsenal signing, who really is carrying the hopes of Japan on her shoulders a little bit. And she's been assigned that very famous number 10 shirt, which is a huge deal in Japan. So without further ado, here's me and Pippa talking to Rich Laverty about Team GB. Okay, and joining us now, as promised, to talk all things Team GB with a slightly Arsenal lens from These Footy Times and Our Game magazine, as well as Sheffield United Women's Media Officer. We're delighted to be joined by Rich Laverty. Rich, thanks for coming on.
Not a problem, mate. Thanks for having me on.
And your second appearance on the podcast now, so you're up on the leaderboard. I think that puts you level with the likes of Faye White and Louise Quinn and Anne-Marie Posma, who was on part 1 of this. So, great to have you back.
Oh, yeah, that's all right company, isn't it?
Yeah, I figure so. Obviously, we'll ask you some questions about Team GB and the Arsenal aspect thereof, and I'll hand over to Pippa to crack on with the first couple of questions.
How you doing, Rich? Good?
Yeah, I'm good, Pippa. How are you?
I'm all good, thanks. I'm really looking forward to the tournament. I feel like it's been an exciting summer of football and getting back into the swing of things with fans back. But talking about Arsenal Women and Team GB, I know we say all the time, Arsenal used to really dominate football. And at the moment, I think it's only 3 players that have made the squad. I think it was 2 before, but now we've got Nikita Paris. So we've got Kim Little, Leah Williamson, whereas Man City, I think I've got like 11 players. But before we get into that, what's your hopes, or what do you think Team GB can do in this Olympics tournament?
I think it's very, very tough. They've been given a pretty tough group, which was always going to happen. I think everyone's got a really tough group just because there are it's a very compact tournament with only 12 teams. I mean, their build-up through no fault of their own really has just been about probably as bad as you could have ever hoped. I mean, even back end of last year with England, friendlies being cancelled, they had a positive COVID test, which got their Germany game cancelled. Norway couldn't travel for a game that was meant to be at Bramall Lane. I think they ended up playing, obviously, Northern Ireland. They had a couple, but, Hege Riise has come in, and obviously their pre-match, their pre-tournament friendly, against Zambia, that had to be cancelled. I think I read this morning they're playing New Zealand tomorrow in a behind closed doors friendly, so it is some kind of preparation. But to only have one game together, I mean, look, a lot of the team obviously do know each other. There's not that many non-English players, and so Sophie Ingle will know a lot of those players. So will Kim Little, so will Caroline Weir. Obviously, particularly Caroline Weir being at Manchester City, like you said, the amount of City players in there, particularly in the midfield.
Yeah.
But yeah, the preparation's been very, very tough. It's going to be hot out there as well, which we always sort of joke about doesn't always suit the English teams. So, but I think even form, the games they have played, they've struggled. They haven't looked like a team that's fulfilling their potential. It's been very tough for Hager, obviously, to come in, and not be able to really play too many games. So I think we sort of have to be a little bit realistic. For me, it's great to have a Team GB. I'm glad we do have one.
Yeah.
But I sort of almost feel like it's good experience for next year. I think if you offered fans and players the opportunity to win one, you'd probably, I mean, a lot of people would love to have a gold medal, but I think when it's a home European Championships, playing a final at Wembley, like we saw the other night, how special that is, the atmosphere at Wembley for a final. There's some very good young players in the squad that are now actually in the squad, not just reserves as well. So it's good experience for them. So I think it's going to be very tough. I think any tournament where you've got the US playing like they are at the minute is always tough, but there's some good teams in there. And yeah, I think Team GB can compete 100%, but I just think the interrupted, warm-up they had makes it very, very difficult.
Yeah, I think it will be difficult because you mentioned obviously the interruptions, the cancellation of games, and then there's even some players in the Arsenal squad that's missed out, such as Jordan Nobbs and Beth Mead. And then you talk about the European Championships next year being at home. When we look back to the Women's World Cup, I feel like even though we had a really good England squad, I feel like they went particularly far because there was a lot of people watching, more than I think they expected, and there was a lot of people behind the team, behind the competition. But I feel like this Olympics is kind of being overshadowed by the Euros that just happened, and then pre-season for the men's game starting pretty much this week, today. And I just feel like it's not being spoken about enough. And do you feel like that will affect the players as well, not having that huge home support they had in the Women's World Cup?
Yeah, potentially. I think it can always work both ways. I think you're right. I don't think there has been the amount of build-up there usually would be. I think there's a number of factors. Like you said, yes, the Euros. I think B, the fact the media haven't really had the access, and that's not me being like snobby, saying we deserve this and we deserve that. It's just been circumstance of obviously these days not being able to have face-to-face press conferences and media days like we would have had in the build-up. There's obviously not a lot of media either going out to Tokyo because the limitations over there are incredibly strict at the moment. So there hasn't probably been the same amount of seeing the interviews and the features and things like that. A, like you said, because people have been focused on the Euros, but B, just because the media haven't really had the kind of access we usually would in pre-COVID times. I hope when the tournament starts it changes, because I think obviously there is no men's Team GB team. So, football fans that want to sit down and watch football, and then they're at decent times, they're sort of early to mid-morning, so people can watch them. They're not going to be middle of the night. You probably prefer them obviously to be late in the evening, but that's just the situation, obviously, of it being in Tokyo. But you can still, I think the first game's at 8:30 a.m. UK time, so hopefully people can still watch. And for fans that want to watch some football, they've got no choice but to watch the women because they can't watch the men. They don't have a team. So I think once the tournament, I think everyone needs a little bit of a detox after the last few days, don't they? I think everyone's just sort of winding down and getting over, obviously, the disappointment of the final. And hopefully, I think the first game's just over a week away. So, yeah, I think there'll be a lot of support from home, definitely. And I hope there are a lot of people that maybe haven't watched women's football regularly that tune in because they just want to watch. And I think that's what you do at an Olympics. Everybody, I'll probably sit down and watch the archery or the equestrian. It's not something I would ever dream of watching for 4 years, but then the Olympics are on and you sort of feel a little bit compelled to watch, whatever you turn on the TV and it's on. So I think the support will be good. It might help, but sometimes the lack of pressure or the lack of, people in the stadium sometimes might relax players a little bit more. So I think it can work both ways. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. I just hope it's a good tournament. I think women's football, we need it. You know, we lost the opportunity last year with the Olympics. We've got 3 major tournaments now in 3 years. So I hope it's just a really good product, whatever happens, because we're still obviously promoting the women's game. We're still trying to get more people interested. So, no, I think it can work both ways. I get what you're saying. It's definitely not had the build-up I think it usually would. And like I said, I think that's just down to a variety of factors around the men's and obviously COVID restrictions as well.
And again, like from an Arsenal, well, I'd say from an Arsenal perspective, I think this was quite widely debated anyway, just among England/Team GB fans. But obviously, Jordan Nobbs and Beth Mead didn't make the squad, didn't make the reserve list. Although I think the reserve list was quite intentionally just young players, so I don't think there was ever any question of them being on the reserve list. But were you surprised by either or both of those decisions, and can you see justification for them from Hege Riise?
Yes and no. Yeah, I can see the justice. I think it always makes me laugh every time there's a squad announcement, whether it's England or Team GB. You get the same questions, the same people arguing, and people think there's big conspiracies and, you know, or they must pick loads of Man City players and things like that. You know, Hege Riise has won an Olympic gold medal. She's won a World Cup. She's won a Euros. You know, she knows what it takes in terms of squad dynamics. And the toughest thing about the Olympics, of course, is the squad size. And someone actually said to me the other day, you know, if they'd known the 4 reserve players would have actually been able to make the squad, would the 4 have been different? You know, would you have had maybe Beth Mead, Jordan Nobbs? You know, if you weren't just taking them along thinking they're just going for the experience, they can't play in the games, you know, would you have taken maybe more experienced players? And I think that's probably a valid question. I think the two are very different. I think with Jordan, it's interesting. I was actually looking at her minutes from last season in the league, and I think she was like outside the top 10, I think, in Arsenal squad. I think she was even below players like Wubben Moy, who's obviously
a lot of injuries,
Yeah, it was just a very... I mean, there's no doubt, you know, Jordan's a top-class player. It's just she had a really interrupted season. I think she only started, 12 league games out of the 22. So I think with Beth, you know, she was much more involved. I think Beth's biggest problem at the moment, internationally, is the emergence of Lauren Hemp, obviously on that left-hand side. And in an Olympics where you're so short on who you can take, you're probably looking at one specialist player in every position. I thought Beth Mead had a fairly decent season. You know, she played, I think, every game bar one. Stats were decent, you know, a lot of assists again, which is obviously what she's become very well known for now in the last few years. But it's very hard to argue that, you know, Lauren Hemp shouldn't have that left wing spot at the minute, the way she's playing, her potential. You know, I think she's going to go on and genuinely, I think she'll be one of the best in the world. So I think if you were picking a squad for a major tournament, a Euros, a World Cup, and you had a few more to play with, and obviously not the Scottish and Welsh and Northern Irish players, I think Beth would have still been in the squad. I think her performances were good enough to still be a squad player. I just think the way the Olympic squad is made up, I think Lauren Hemp was always going to be the one to get that left wing role. And I think with Jordan, it was just down to, you know, probably again, just had a bit of a disrupted season. You know, Kira Walsh was always going to go. I think Kaz Weir was always going to go. Kim, it's very hard, you know, the leadership, the experience that she's got, that she wasn't going to go. So I would have probably taken her over Jill Scott, but I can understand why Jill's going. Again, people sometimes scoff at it, but that experience factor that she has of being at a major tournament before, being at an Olympics before as well. So if they both, I can see the reasons. I think they're both very different. I think Jordan is just down to potentially lack of consistent game time across the season. I think Beth Mead is solely down to the fact that, you know, she's got Lauren Hemp ahead of her now.
Yeah, and obviously Jordan didn't play in central midfield for Arsenal pretty much at all. She played largely on the left-hand side, and I think that's probably cost her, because as you point out, England have got plenty of depth in those wide forward positions. And speaking of which, I mean, I guess another player who kept Beth out really here is Nikita Parris, who signed for Arsenal this summer. What do you make of that as a signing for Arsenal?
I think it'd be a very good signing. I think internationally, I was a little bit surprised actually that she was. So I think Keats potentially got in because Chloe Kelly got injured. I think that would have been maybe a similar situation to Beth, where, you know, Chloe probably had that right wing role pretty much sewn up before obviously she did her ACL. because Keats has been largely playing as a striker now for the last few years. Her last year at Manchester City, she was a striker. She has played on the wing at times for Lyon, but she's been used as a striker since Ada Hegerberg got injured. I think it's got a lot of potential. Keats she's inconsistent, but she does score a lot of goals. She's very fast, and I think I almost look at it a little bit. I hate comparing to the men's, but I look at sort of Kane and Son over at Tottenham, the way Kane drops deep, gets a lot of assists. I think you'll see that with Mead, and I think if she has someone like Keats with her movement running off her, I think that has potential to be a very fruitful partnership. I hope they find a way of getting them in there really together and not Keats just playing as a winger out on the right. She can do that, there's no doubt about it, and she'll get assists and she'll get goals, but I think almost as a narrow front two playing together, the trickery, the movement, the vision Miedema has, aside from just being a goal scorer, I think she will find Keats a lot, and I think she will score goals. She's one of the top scorers in the WSL history, and she's not been here for the last 2 years, so her record speaks for itself. Is she going to go and bang 20 goals in like Viv will and win them the league on their own? Probably not, but I'd be surprised if she wasn't, pushing double figures and getting assists, because I think she's still got a lot to give. When she has a consistent season, like she did her final year at Manchester City, I think she's a very, very good player. And I think it's actually a smart signing. I think saw some clubs being linked to her. Some fans were saying, we don't want her, or we don't want, this player, that player. So, and I can understand it. She's limited in terms of her overall talent. She's never going to be a Miedema or a Hegerberg. But no, I think it's a good signing. I think it's a really good signing from Arsenal. The proof will be in the performances, but I like Keats. I think she's a very, very good player.
I looking at the makeup of the squad, like you say, it's largely England, but there are 3 players who aren't English in the squad: Sophie Ingle, Caroline Weir and Kim Little. And obviously we're going to focus on Kim a little bit. I think it was never in question that Kim Little would be in this squad. Personally, I don't think it's a coincidence that the 3 players who aren't from the Lionesses, who've been selected at all to some extent central midfield players, because I do think that that's an area where the Lionesses have a bit of a weakness if you're talking about the absolute top level, which is why I still can't work out why England undervalue Jordan Nobbs, but that's another conversation. Do you think that Kim will start? And I guess, what do you think this Team GB midfield will look like? Do you think it could be Ingle, Little and Caroline Weir?
I think there's every chance. I do think Kira Walsh will start. I think it's interesting as well that Sophie Ingle, I don't try and read too much into shirt numbers, but Millie Bright I would thought would have been the 6, or Leah Williamson would have been the 6, where Sophie Ingle's been given that shirt number. And I kind of always associate that with sort of being a centre-back. So I don't know whether they maybe see Sophie Ingle as that, whether it's alongside Steph or in a back 3, or I don't know. Again, as I said earlier, there is literally no precedent because we haven't seen Team GB play. So we've got no idea where Sophie Ingle slots in, or Kim Little or Kaz Weir. I certainly wouldn't be surprised to see the other 2 start. I think if I was picking a midfield 3 now off the squad, it would probably be Kira sitting with Kim and Caroline just in front of them. Kim is not at the level she was 7-8 years ago, but that's understandable. She was world class 7-8 years ago. You can never, with the injuries she's had as well. I think she's 31 now, but she's still a very, very good player. Kaz Weir had an unbelievable season. There's no doubt for me that she should be starting. I think it'll be Walsh. It's good to have those 2 options as your defensive midfielders because they're both top class. You're right with what you say about midfielders. I'm not surprised. I think when we looked at the makeup and you looked at also even Hayley Ladd, Jess Fishlock, Erin Cuthbert, players like that, no surprise that, there were midfielders coming from other countries. I look at England's midfield and I think, well, where's the next one coming from? Jill Scott's 34 now. Kira's there probably for the next decade, but beyond that, Jordan's never really nailed down a role because, like Tim said, I don't think England have ever really known what to do with her. And beyond that, you do look at it and go, okay, Lucy Stanningforth sort of come and gone, Laura Coombs, Izzy Christensen. And I do worry. I remember going to the Under-20 World Cup 3 years ago, and even then I remember thinking, like, we had Lauren Hemp in the team, and Stanway was playing up front with Russo and Chloe Kelly, and I looked at the midfield, and I think it was sort of Molly Rouse, Zoe Cross, Chloe Peplow, and Peplow's been around a few clubs now. Rouse is playing in the championship, so there is sort of a dearth of midfielders, in terms of where are they coming from for England next. So you're right that there's no surprise for me that the foreign players, the Scottish and Welsh players have come from non-English countries, because I think England is severely lacking depth in there at the moment, and obviously post Olympics, when we go off and start concentrating on the Euros next year and the World Cup, I'll be really interested to see what England's midfield looks like over the next 2, 3, 5 years, because at the moment I'm not sure where they're coming from. So they could all start, it wouldn't surprise me. For me at the moment, I'd look at it and probably go Kira and then Kim and Kaz playing just in front of them. I think the front three probably picks itself at the moment. I think you'll probably see Ellen. Well, it's tough because, you've got Fran Kirby. Obviously, she could play maybe the 10 role. She might play instead of Kim. They could just go with her up front in place of Ellen White. I don't know. They've got some options. I think certainly Hemp will play from the left and probably Paris from the right. It would be interesting to see whether she thinks, right, let's get the, because Ellen White tends to perform in big tournaments. She tends to score goals. And whether they go with Kirby behind her, then obviously you're probably going to have to sacrifice one of Kim or Kaz. I think it'd be a real shame to sacrifice Kaz, because I think she has had a great season. But like Tim said, you sort of always feel Kim Little will start if she's there and she's fit. So, it's good to have those options. But I hope we don't sort of keep seeing Fran Kirby as kind of this midfielder just because we don't have anyone else. I think the way she worked for Chelsea was brilliant, but obviously we don't have Sam Kerr and Pernille Harder, so which is a shame. But yeah, they've got those options in there. But there's no surprise to me that the midfield is where the non-English players have come from, because there does seem to be a real lack of depth.
Speaking about options for positions and slotting players in and focusing on Arsenal players here. This player's also had a great season, has been spoken about as a possible future captain in years to come. But in previous tournaments, such as the Women's World Cup a couple of years ago, obviously Leah Williamson didn't really get a chance to play really because of the experience in the back line, and Millie Bright will also be attending this tournament. So do you think this time around in the Olympics with Team GB, Leah Williamson could have some time to shine? Is there any potential possibility that she could start in some of these games?
I really hope so. I think she needs that exposure soon with tournaments coming thick and fast, because there is no doubt Leah is going to, whether it's now or at some point in the near future, she's going to be a starter. Steph is 33 now. She's not. She might be around next year. She might be around the year after, but probably the cycle after that, she won't be. It's tough, it's very, very tough, because Steph and Millie has sort of been the go-to partnership over the years. Millie had a very good season with Chelsea, apart from probably that Manchester City game when they basically won the league. Thought she was very, very shaky in that. I thought Steph got a lot of criticism probably around the time of the World Cup. Maybe her performances had dipped, and I think there was certainly an element of truth in that. I actually thought last season she was very good for Manchester City. I think maybe having a lack of international football and maybe the lack of travel and lack of distractions elsewhere maybe helped her. I did think she was very, very good for City. She's obviously the captain, so if she's fit and ready, you're always going to expect Steph Horton to start, and there's always going to be that one position alongside her. For me, as a preference, I would always just lean towards Leah. I think it's strange because centre-backs are centre-backs, but Leah and Millie are very different. I think Leah is obviously the more playing out from the back, the passer, they get on the ball, whereas Millie Bright, she'll get on the end of things, she'll clear crosses, she's the tough one, the one that will just get stuck in and get ahead on things and clear the crosses. And Leah will do that, but I'm sure people will understand what I mean when I say they're very different players. Steph very similar to Leah in terms of more playing out from the back, more getting on the ball. It's a shame you can't play all three of them. They could obviously if they go with a back three, but I think you're always more likely to maybe in a back three see a Sophie Ingle go back into the centre of it to play out. But look, Leah's 24 now, and she's ready. She's not a kid anymore. I think we got to that point with the men a few years ago. People were still calling Jessie Lingard a youngster, and I think 27, 28 now. So, by the time the World Cup's gone by in 2 years' time, Leah will be 26. So she is not a youngster anymore, and there's a few in there now that you can't really class as youngsters. Kira Walsh is 24, and Georgia Stanway's 22. So they're getting to the point now where they're ready. They're old enough, they're mature enough, they've had enough big games, they've played cup finals and big league games and won titles. So the proof will be in training. I'm sure Hager will pick who performs the best, hopefully, and if that's Millie, it's Millie. If it's Leah, it's Leah. And I think it's good, again, like I said, with the strikers, that we've got those options. If something happened to Millie, you've got all the confidence in the world in Leah to step in. If something happens to Leah, vice versa with Millie. And Lotta in there as well. I think she's a really talented player. And I think, in years to come, you might see her and Leah as the England centre-back partnership. So, but no, I think she's still, got 20 caps or something now at 24. So it will be interesting to see if she starts. I certainly wouldn't be against it. I think she's a top player. People who have known me for years and have watched Leah for years know that I always still think she should have been a midfielder. And that she would have been better in there, but she's turned into a very good centre back, and if she starts for Team GB, I don't think we'll be any worse off for it at all.
Yeah, I am sorry, Pippa. I'll come back to you in a sec for another question, but I just wanted to come in on that. I often wondered if England would use her as a midfielder, because I think England's need is perhaps greater in there than Arsenal's, was until recently, maybe. I think the issue for Leah is that at Arsenal she plays on the right of the centre-back partnership, and that's where she's most comfortable passing out. And that's where Millie is as well. And so the relationship in terms of types between Leah and Millie is quite good for the reasons you say, but they both like the right. And Leah, I don't think, looks as comfortable playing for England on the left. And I don't think you can have Leah and Steph together either, because they're too similar. So I think for Leah to flourish at international level, I think either moving her into midfield or finding a way that she can be on the right of the partnership and someone else coming in on the left. But personally, I think that's been the issue for her. Sorry for that interjection. I'll hand back to you, Pippa.
No, it's fine, because I was wondering what I was going to say next, because obviously I've seen Leah Williamson play in midfield positions previously under Joe Montemurro, and she's looked more than comfortable there. But like you said, there's so many midfield options in this Team GB team, and I'm just wondering for her personally when she's going to have her moment, because like Rich said, like, she's not young anymore, and that's always been the argument. She at the World Cup is like, she's too young, she's not experienced, but she is experienced. She's won the league, she's played in many games for seasons, and I think it's really her time to step up now.
Yeah, definitely, and yeah, it'll be really interesting to see this summer. But Rich, I wondered, if in closing, we haven't really talked much about the manager Hager Risa so far, the interim manager. I mean, personally, the way I look at it, I think the Lionesses, anyway, have essentially had an interim manager since the World Cup finished, because I think Phil Neville was kind of looking for a way out, and then he had a way out, and we had this kind of bizarre. And still slightly in that kind of, I guess, that limbo before Serena comes in after the Olympics. What have you made of Hager Risa so far? And I guess the situation where she's coming in as an interim. How in the games at least the Lionesses have played under her, what have you made so far of her short reign?
It's been massively hard to judge, mate. I mean, I think when a new manager comes in, there's always going to be a little bit of a dip. I mean, it wasn't easy to dip further than they were before, because they've, just won so few games. But, to come in and suddenly have to prepare a team, that you're only going to be with for a few months for a tournament where you have a squad where some of them haven't played together before, and not really be able to have, as much preparation as you would want, is tough. And, the two friendlies, obviously, against France and Canada didn't go the way they wanted. But, I mean, I say this all the time, I never read a huge amount into friendlies, because teams always have players missing. France had players missing, England had players missing. they rotate. I think in the Canada game, the goalkeeper, Karen Bardsley, wouldn't have been the usual number one they would play, when they play Canada in Tokyo. They had a few other players in there that probably wouldn't be starting when you get to Tokyo. And like you said, for those games, they didn't have Kim Little, they didn't have Kaz Weir, they didn't have Sophie Ingalls. So I think it was just about Hager being able to get some games in, to be honest. The results weren't perfect. There were definitely flaws in the performances. And that's been an issue since the World Cup, quite frankly, since the semi-final loss. It started in the third place playoff against Sweden, and it's continued for the last 2 years now. There is no doubt Team GB is a squad full of very talented players who on their day can take on anybody. They can take on the US. They might not beat them, but they can compete with them. When England have played the US the last 2-3 meetings, they've never been battered. There's always been, 1-2 goals in it. And that was the same at the World Cup. So they're capable, they are absolutely capable, but the scenario and the situation they are in is not ideal. The thing I like about after the Olympics for Serena coming in is you've actually just got a good run of games eventually against teams that you're going to beat as well. They've got the qualifiers for the World Cup. They're going to play North Macedonia and Luxembourg and Latvia and Northern Ireland and teams like that, who they will win. And, they'll be able to probably get some competitive friendlies in there as well to prepare for the Euros. You're not going to... It's a strange scenario now, obviously, going through World Cup qualifiers when you've got European Championships to prepare for as well. And obviously, you don't really want to prepare for a major tournament playing teams like Luxembourg and North Macedonia. So I'm sure they'll try and sneak some friendlies in there. So hopefully the games will come thick and fast for this team. And I think there will be a handover period. I think the time now is where players like Ella Toone and Lotta and Niamh Charles, etc., they have to now become part of the squad. Alessia Russo, Lauren James, Ebony Salmon, etc. The time after the Olympics is now, because we've got 2 major tournaments coming up, and there is no doubt those players are going to be the future. And if you can get them in, if you can ingrain them in games like North Macedonia and Luxembourg, where there's very little pressure, and you're going to win those games, largely just by turning up, they're ingrained within the squad. Then they know what it's about, and then when they need to face some more competitive teams in the friendlies, they're ready for it. And then after that, they're ready for a tournament, and you build them up to it. So, yeah, for Hager, it's been very, very difficult. I don't envy her the situation that she's come into, picking a team up that was basically on the floor anyway with the results they've had. She's had such little time, 3 friendly matches and 1 behind closed doors game tomorrow, by the sound of it, to prepare for a tournament. So, but, she's clearly a good coach. Her record speaks for itself. And like I said, as a player, she's one of very, very few women on the planet that have won every major tournament you could. So she knows what it takes. She knows what's there. She knows how to do it. So we just got to get on with it. The situation we're in is what we're in. It's been influenced by a lot of things, COVID and some non-COVID things. Obviously, the manager changing, like you said. But I do see genuinely post-Olympics a very bright future with the players coming through and the opportunities we have now in the next few years tournament-wise, especially being at home next year. But Serena just has to be bold. I've defended the decisions of not rushing young players into the squad, and some people don't like that. Some people agree, some people disagree. I completely see it both ways. I never think a young player should be overly exposed to international football before they're ready. It's such a different ball game. It's such a different environment, and I think it's more intense than club football. I really do. But there has to be a time when you do it, and I think with 2 tournaments coming up and a lot of qualifiers, I think they've got 6 qualifiers between September and the end of November. So, and probably 6 games that England should win. If we're not seeing, the Ella Toones, the Ebony Salmons, the Wubben Moyes, the Lauren Jameses, etc., at least being in the squad, and if not starting games by then I think we've got, I think we've made a mistake somewhere down the line. So, and I think that's probably the right time for a fresh manager to come in who can just come in, pick who she wants. Don't have to think about who was there before or who might be on the way out. So I think it's a really good time. I think Olympics is just one of those you grin and bear it and hope for the best because the prep hasn't been ideal. But I think for the next few years, I think there's a lot to be excited about.
Yeah, and that's actually been a theme, talked about Netherlands so far and Australia in particular, and the theme coming out is that preparation not ideal for most of these teams, but they see the Olympics as get through it, and then after that we're in a kind of new cycle. Before we let you go, Rich, quick prediction. Who do you think is going to win this tournament? Who do you think will pick up the gold medal?
I think it'd be the US. I really do. I know it's a boring answer, but they are the best team in the world, and preparation-wise, they don't really seem to have been affected. Like, they seem to be playing friendlies as regularly as ever. Tobin Heath's obviously just come back fresh and fit. Sounds like they might get Julie Ertz back. They've got that experience. They know how to win. They've got some players now peaking. Kristen Press is probably in her best international form. Sam Mewish, has fast become one of the best in the world now in her position. They're still solid at the back. They've just got players that know how to. Even Alex Morgan, she started scoring at club level as well. Alex Morgan's one of those you always say scores internationally. Record at club level has not been there the last few years, but she had a good start to the year with Orlando. So all their top players, seem to be in good form. They've had loads of friendly games that they've been able to prepare with, and I think even without COVID, even before that, you make the US the favourites. I think. If you asked me for maybe more of a dark horse, I mean, look, Japan will always have a chance with being the hosts. They're a technically very good football team, but I do fancy Sweden to go far. I really like the Swedish team. I think they've got some really experienced top players, but I really like some of the players coming through, some of which we're obviously going to see in the WSL now with Onvegaard and Bjorn going to Everton. So I think they're always solid. They're always hard to beat, and they've got some really good players up the top end of the pitch. Don't think they'll win it. I think it will be the US, but if I was going to be slightly less boring and go for maybe someone I think might surprise a few people or maybe even reach the final, I'll throw Sweden's name out there. I think it's a real shame Spain out there, because I think Spain are a team for me could win the Euros next year. I think they're an unbelievable team, and it's a real shame they're not there, but I think they're definitely going to be a team the next few years will really become tournament contenders.
Yeah, we talked about them a little bit in the Netherlands segment, actually, and completely agree. Pippa, before we go, do you think anyone other than the US can take the gold medal?
Joe, it's a hard one to pick because you just don't know what to expect. But I would say Sweden, definitely a good shout, and they got far in the World Cup as well. But because of the players that are close to my heart, I would love to say Netherlands as well, for the sake of Viv and Jill and so many other players. So yeah, hopefully, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, indeed. I think US clear favourites, but then there's a real gabble of teams who are probably joint second favourites, and you'd probably put Team G in that bracket as well. But that's all we've got time for this segment. Rich, thanks so much for your time and your insights.
Not a problem, mate. Thanks for having me on again, like I said.
Many thanks to Rich for his insights, and you can follow him on Twitter at RichJLaverty. I will say we recorded that before we discovered that Team GB had played a behind closed doors friendly against New Zealand, which they won 3-0 with goals from a double from Ellen White and a goal from Arsenal's new signing Nikita Parris. It's also been announced since that there will be 3 captains for Team GB. I think this is quite neat the way they've done this, actually. So one of the captains will be Welsh international Sophie Ingle of Chelsea. Then the second captain, as it were, will be Steph Houghton of Manchester City and the captain of England. And the third captain will be Arsenal's own Kim Little of Scotland. And they will captain a game each in the group stages. But we're told that Kim captained Team GB for their friendly against New Zealand. So a good leadership group there. And obviously, as Arsenal fans, we know both the quality of Kim Little as a player and as a leader. So probably not a huge surprise that she's been bestowed with that joint honour. But anyway, without further ado, now it's going to be just me talking to Sean Carroll about Japan, Tokyo, the Olympics, and of course, Mana Iwabuchi. Okay, joining me now on the Arsenal Women Arsecast to talk about Japan at the Olympic Games in 2021, actually. The host team is Sean Carroll, a freelance journalist who is based in Tokyo. Sean, thanks for joining the show.
No worries at all. Thanks a lot for having me on.
Before we kind of talk about Japan and maybe a bit about Mana Iwabuchi, I just wanted to ask a fairly general question, Sean, about the feeling on the ground locally in Tokyo about the Olympics, about it going ahead at all, I guess, and the way in which it will kind of go ahead. Because obviously this is a really strange time to host, and it's going to be a really strange Olympic Games. What kind of feel is there any anticipation, excitement, or is it kind of mainly anxiety at the moment?
No, there's not really much excitement, I'd have to say. It's a bit odd because we've been in and out of what they call states of emergency for pretty much the last year, maybe year and a half now. So we never actually locked down like they did back in England or elsewhere around the world. But what they did is had these things called states of emergency, where they kind of asked people to refrain from sort of going out and about unless they had to. At one point, restaurants and things were sort of asked to be closed. Now the current state of emergency, they're allowed to be open, but places aren't allowed to sell alcohol. So with regards to the Olympics initially being sort of postponed for a year and then going ahead, I think there's a kind of on the ground here. I mean, it's Japanese people are not sort of inclined in the way that people maybe back home would be to pour out on the streets and be particularly vocal in their opposition. But I think there is, from the people I've spoken to, sort of who work within and outside of sport, there's a kind of feeling of like, well, if we can't get on with things as normal, and if we're having to kind of follow certain rules and restrictions, the fact that the games are going to be going ahead, I think there's a little bit of maybe not quite animosity, but a feeling of like it doesn't really sit right, I think.
Yeah, and that's interesting because obviously over here in London we've just had like some massive football games with lots of people at them, and excuse me, and I think there's a real sense that that's kind of brought the curtain down on, you know, COVID and lockdown, and yet cases are going up and things like that. So it's a really kind of interesting time, to say the least, to host an Olympic Games. In terms of you covering it, you know, we know that like most of the events are going to be behind closed doors by the sounds of it, and very limited number of kind of foreign journalists allowed in. What kind of hoops are you having to jump through just to cover it?
Oh, it's been quite crazy. I wasn't really sure what the situation would be with my pass, obviously because of it being suspended initially for a year and then coming back on. So then I did pick up my pass a couple of weeks ago, and I sort of asked them then, like, is that everything I need to do? And they just said, yeah. And then kind of just from word of mouth, speaking to other journalist friends and whatever, they were saying, oh, don't forget, you know, you need to do testing, you need to get on this system, you need to. And there's been very little by way of actual assistance from the organizational side. And obviously during COVID, there's so many issues and so much stuff is changing by the day. You know, I'm hesitant to sort of complain too much or point any fingers as to where the blame is. But it does seem that a lot, I mean, I'm lucky in a sense to be a resident in Japan and to already be on the ground. But there are people coming in from abroad who are being told they need to submit this thing, they need to be on this system, they need to make sure all this stuff's registered. And they're sort of pretty much everyone is in charge of themselves. So, yeah, I need to be registered on something. I need to have a couple of apps on my phone and every day I need to be logging my temperature, confirming I don't have any symptoms. I need to be providing, there's like these kind of home COVID tests. They're just the kind of the saliva ones. And I need to be submitting them at least every 4 days during the competition. But again, this is only info I've kind of been able to find out myself or heard from other people. So there's still a slight anxiety on my part that I might not be doing something quite right. And when I turn up at the stadium, they might say, where's this form or where's this app? You need to do this. You can't come in. So there's a lot of kind of anxiety. And again, I don't want to complain too much because, as you said, there's people who bought tickets or have got tickets through the lottery and then bought them and now they can't go. So I'm still in a very privileged position to be able to go and watch the games live. But yeah, I'm sort of alongside all of the stresses and the preparation that you usually have when it comes to covering a tournament. There's all this other stuff going on in the background, and it hasn't been explained especially clearly. So I think there is a sense as with sort of the preparations as a whole and the general mood here, there's definitely more of a sense of anxiety than excitement at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. And I can imagine if you're coming from another country and perhaps your grasp on Japanese is not fantastic, that's probably even more anxious when you're traveling. But I kind of moving away from that and going towards, the Japanese women's team who will obviously take part in this tournament as the hosts and as a really strong team in general, former world champions just 10 years ago. They played a kind of warm-up game they played a few warm-up games recently, a couple that weren't super competitive against the likes of Ukraine, but they played Australia yesterday as we record. A game they won 1-0 thanks to a Mana Iwabuchi penalty. What kind of did you make of them in that game, and what kind of shape are they going into this tournament in?
As always with these kind of friendlies, it's tricky to take too much away from it. Once you got to the second half, both teams were making their full allocations of substitutes. The key players were being brought off. You could see that both managers were, I guess, trying things out. The Japan coach put in a couple of the younger players who've only recently come into the squad, whether that's with a sign that she thinks that they might go straight into the team, or whether it's just to give them a bit of experience and see how they cope against another decent side. But yeah, Japan look good. I mean, they always, the way they play is very much based on moving the ball around, keeping possession, sort of good combinations in that way. And they look pretty sharp. They look pretty confident. Obviously, the World Cup win from 2011 is the thing that always gets mentioned. But this is a very different generation now. Almost all the players from that team are gone. And yeah, when the new manager Asako Takakura took over in 2016, it was almost that she brought in a lot of these younger players and has continued to do so. So they look good, but again, with that caveat of as the game wore on, it was clear that both coaches were more wary of not picking up injuries and not tiring players out rather than really going for it.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of young players being brought in, and that was going to be my next question, actually, because the sense I got at the 2019 World Cup, Japan picked a really young squad for that tournament. It surprised a lot of people, and the sense I got from that they were almost using the World Cup to prepare for the Olympics, which at the time we thought was 12 months away. Was that assumption right, do you think, or is it just that this coach really likes bringing through young players? Because it sounds like they're still doing it.
I think it's probably a bit of both. The Olympics is a very, very big deal for Japanese football. Coming from England, where in the Williams Hill, obviously the Team GB team played in 2012, we don't really have that connection. And I think a lot of the more established football countries, maybe from the men's side, because I know the women's tournament hasn't been going as long, it's not seen as the pinnacle. The World Cup is the main tournament. But in Japan, for the men's and the women's teams, the Olympics is very, very big. So I think there probably was an element of that, especially because, it's in Tokyo, it's the home Olympics. There was expected to be, that pressure, that atmosphere of being the home team. Now we're sadly not going to get that because of the fact that the games will predominantly be behind closed doors. So I think, as I said, I think Takakura was working with the young players before as well, so she knows them. And I think there's that element of trusting in the young players. I mean, Mana herself made her debut when she was about 17 or 18 for the national team anyway. Homare Sawa, who's obviously sort of a legend of the game, was similar. So I think in women's football, maybe it's changing a bit more now. But traditionally over here, there hasn't been such a barrier with age. And younger players, if they're good enough, are sort of thrown in. And the current manager seems quite willing to give those players chances. That's continued, as I said, right up to now with a couple of players being thrown in who haven't had the most experience.
And what about just in general? I was going to ask a question about women's football in Japan and whether it's growing, because obviously, winning the World Cup in 2011, you imagine that would lead to quite a big growth. And in England, we're seeing quite a big growth with, Sky Sports throwing their kind of weight behind it and big diaspora of foreign players coming into the WSL, and it feels like women's football is kind of on a verge to explode moment over here. What and in Japan, the top league is just about to go professional. What about women's football in Japan? How big is it at the moment?
It's tied up, as with a lot of sports over here, it's tied up with the national team. So when they won the World Cup, when they got to the final of the 2012 Olympics and the final of 2015, although the result in 2015 obviously was terrible once they got to the final, when they're doing well and they're getting a lot of kind of general interest from, for TV coverage, whatever, there's a kind of boom around it, but it quickly fades. And I think the fact that there wasn't a professional league in place to kind of capitalize on things then, it was always kind of semi-pro. A lot of the best players were concentrated in 2 or 3 clubs. So those clubs had a bit of a following. But yeah, games were not broadcast on TV. There wasn't a huge amount of coverage aside from the kind of the star players. It never really developed beyond a kind of superficial interest. And I think the fact that the WE League, as it's called, which stands for Women Empowerment League, which is slightly condescending, perhaps. The fact that will be starting in September, hopefully, will enable them to build in the way that they kind of weren't able to in 2011. So if the team can do well at the Olympics, it will build up that kind of fervour again. And then afterwards, hopefully, if people are allowed into stadiums, fans will be able to go and watch these players playing regularly. DAZN, which is the broadcaster over here, they have the rights to the J League and the Premier League and several other European leagues and things, have announced that they'll be broadcasting the WE League as well. So it's going to be there for people to access, for people to watch. And I think that's what you need. You need that connection. You need ways for people to build some kind of connection initially, and then for them to build upon it, to gain some kind of attachment to the teams and the players. I've spoken to a few foreign players who've played against Japan or who played here, and they were just full of praise for the level of play here, the level of coaching. They said, compared to one player from America I spoke to, just said that the attention to detail, the way they train, was phenomenal, and it's something, she's now a coach, and she said it's something that she has definitely learned from. So I think it's definitely on the up. More and more Japanese players now as well are moving to Europe and moving to the States and developing with the sort of the level that they're playing at, which again, as with all sport, then it serves to motivate younger players, girls that want to come up. When I interviewed Mana recently, she said that, by playing in England, she wants to show girls back in Japan that it is possible to move abroad, to go and play in these big clubs in Europe and whatever. So I think, it's key that there's that professional league, there's that structure. All the players are going to be paid. They're going to be able to make a career from football, rather than at some point having to make that decision as to do I take the risk, or do I just go with the safe option and get a career in something else.
And the kind of, I guess, the stereotypical kind of impression of the Japanese women's team, certainly in Europe, well, certainly in England, and I think in Europe, is that they're this kind of lovely technical team, full of loads of lovely technical players, lots of short passing and moving, and I think Mana's very much in that mould. Is that, do you think, a fair representation of what Japanese, the Japanese team and Japanese women's football is like, or do you think there's a bit more to it at the moment?
No, I think that's fair. They can't. I mean, the game against Australia yesterday, you can see there's such a vast difference in the physical size that I don't think they're not going to be able to try and play long to get balls into the box. There's no point if you're playing against Australia, Holland, Sweden. You're not going to get any joy. They have to stick to what they can do. And, Australia are another reasonably fancied team heading into the games. They haven't been in the best form recently, but, they could do reasonably well. And Japan, for the most part, again, it was only a friendly, but for the most part, they were completely in control of the ball. So I think that's fair. They will build. They'll push on. The fullbacks will push on as well. And the forwards, they do get stuck in. They're not weak by any means. But I think, definitely it will be based upon keeping the ball, moving it around quickly and looking for those spaces to capitalize upon rather than trying to go toe to toe with bigger, more physical teams.
Yeah, definitely. And Japan drawn in a group with Team GB, Canada and Chile. Quite a tough group. I mean, they're all quite tough groups because of the size of the tournament. What are the kind of expectations for Japan? Can they win it?
I think winning it is going to be a tall order, just because, America are there, and America just seem to be on a completely different level. And as you mentioned, the group that Japan are in is not easy either. It's such a tough competition, and again, it depends on how the draw goes, how you get through. As we saw with the England men's team at the Euros, other big teams get knocked out by other teams. You don't have to beat everyone, so it's not impossible for them to get a medal if they can build up a head of steam and get through the group on their day. They're capable of beating most of the teams in the competition. But I just think if they were to make it to the final again and they came up against America, it's going to take something superhuman. The time they beat America in 2011, Homare Sawa probably played the game of her life. She was just phenomenal. The game was so touch and go. There were so many points at which it could have gone the other way. And I think, for Japan to win it, they need to get past America. And there's obviously a lot of other teams in there. I think the Netherlands will be strong. I think Sweden obviously will be good. Team GB are obviously predominantly the England side, and I don't think Japan have actually ever beaten them, or certainly not in a competitive fixture. So I don't think many people within football are expecting them to get gold. There's obviously sort of an enthusiasm, a hope that they can do well with it being at home, and the fact that they've been able to train in a kind of bubble here for so long and prepare, whereas other countries are obviously having to overcome so many hurdles and deal with so many extra things that, not just are they having to travel on the other side of the world, but with all the COVID issues as well. They'll probably they should be the best prepared team. But I think a gold if they won gold, it would be an absolutely phenomenal achievement. But I think they're definitely one of the half a dozen or so that can be in with a real shout of picking up a medal.
Yeah, definitely think so. And just last couple of questions, because obviously there's one Arsenal player in the squad, very, very big player as well in Mana Iwabuchi. I mean, I know that Arsenal tried to make that transfer happen kind of after the World Cup, and the Japanese, the JFA kind of intervened and said that she couldn't move to Europe until after the Olympics, and obviously the Olympics got delayed, and then she got parked at Aston Villa for a few months. So it's been a really convoluted transfer to get her to Arsenal, alongside some of her best friends, Vivian Miedema and Lisa Evans. How is and I know she's been given the number 10 shirt for this tournament, which I know is like a quite a big thing. How is she viewed in Japan, and were people surprised that she chose to come back to Europe?
To take the first question, and being given the number 10 is a huge thing. I mean, I lost count of the amount of times the commentators mentioned it last night. It's seen as such a big deal in Japan. And the fact that obviously Sawa had number 10 when they won it, there were lots of references to her taking over that mantle. She is the main player. She is the star of the team, and she's the one that everybody is looking to provide those moments that decide games in their favour. Obviously, there's a lot of talent in the team, but she is seen as the kind of star, and being given number 10, from not just from the football side of things, but from a marketing point of view, from the branding point of view, that situates her clearly as the kind of figurehead of the team. It was a bit of a surprise, really, that she went back over to Europe. Obviously, she'd been in Germany for a while previously, and when she came back, as with male players, really, they go abroad, and once they come back, it's kind of seen as, okay, well, that's it, they're back now. When I interviewed her a couple of months ago, I kind of asked about that, and she just said, well, she said that she wanted to come back to be able to prepare for the Olympics. For her, the Olympics was such a big deal. She always wanted, as soon as Tokyo was decided as host, she said that she had that as a target where she wanted to achieve success. So the way she framed it, I don't know as much as you know there. Obviously, you said that maybe the JFA had something to do with it, but she said that she wanted to come back and be able to prepare properly by being here for that, but that she always had it at the back of her mind that if the chance came up, she wanted to go abroad, that she enjoys that challenge of being abroad, the everything that goes with it, not just on the pitch, but the living in a different country, the making connections with different people, the trying to learn another language. So there was an element maybe from people within the game of surprise that she went back over, and obviously that she went over for Aston Villa, who obviously were not one of the strongest teams in the WSL, although obviously it's a growing league and each club is trying to establish itself. But yeah, there's excitement. Again, the women's game is not followed particularly closely here. People have obviously heard of Arsenal because the men's team is so strong, so there's the assumption that it's a big club, and obviously the women's team as well is one of the most successful, if not the most successful. I don't know, I have to admit, I'm not sure of the trophy count myself. But it's huge. And again, with the Olympics now, if she can do well and help Japan win a medal there, then it will definitely add to the interest of more and more people will be following to see how she does with Arsenal in the coming season.
Yeah, definitely. And it is incumbent on me to say on this podcast that Arsenal are the most successful team in England by quite a long distance. So
I do apologise.
I'll put that on record. My final question, actually, you referred to your interview with her back in April, which was published in The Guardian in the UK. And obviously at the time, when you read the interview back now, there was a lot of uncertainty over whether the Olympics would even still be going ahead or under what circumstances. And, there's stuff in there like I'm prepared for it to be cancelled and things like that. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about, she talked a little bit about maybe some of the stress of competing during COVID. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that in the conversation you had with her.
Yeah, well, the main thing she was saying was, I think, and it's been coming out a little bit in the news from sort of different perspectives, but for everybody when it comes to these competitions, whether it's the Olympics, whether it's World Cups or European Championships or whatever, it's not just about the games. For the athletes, you always hear stories of the athletes, the goings on in the athletes' village, the athletes going out into the host cities and, being spotted at tourist sites, meeting fans. And there's that whole kind of, I don't want to use the cliche of carnival atmosphere, but there's so many other things that come with it. And all of that is going to be lacking now for the athletes. I sort of touched upon the hurdles that the media are having to jump through, and for the players themselves and everyone sort of close to the teams, coaches, media staff associated with the teams. My understanding is they're having to do COVID testing every single day. They're being kept in these bubbles. So, there's not going to be that release in between games where you can just all go out together and get a coffee and maybe, meet some fans or just go out for a wander around and stretch your legs and blow off some steam. They're going to be in hotels together for the whole time. They're going to be ferried to and from the venues, and they're not going to have any kind of interaction with I guess even with other teams. There's probably going to be so many strict protocols. How well they can be enforced, we don't really know. But I think, she was touching upon that fact, not just the being cooped up and not being able to get away. I think that everyone gets on well within the team, but if there are certain players that don't quite have the best relationship, maybe normally, 2 or 3 of you can go off somewhere else, but you're going to be with the same people every day, all day, pretty much for the best part of a month. If they make it to the end, it will be more than a month, obviously. And on top of that, she said, obviously, with regards to the COVID testing, you're always going to have that in the back of your mind. What if it does come back positive? We saw with the England players at the Euros, with Mason Mount and Ben Chilwell had to then self-isolate. It then means you need to reassess who, Southgate then had to change who he's going to play for certain games. It throws so many things into doubt. So for the players to also have this burden, as well as the regular stresses of winning the next game, of progressing, of trying to win a medal, I think is something else that definitely needs to be kept in mind.
Yeah, definitely. And, reports today, there are a couple of GB athletes in other sports who have tested positive for COVID, and that's it. They can't come over. That's, Olympics over for them. And that's, got to be hugely upsetting for them, but fingers crossed.
Well, that's the other
like
thing.
That.
There was, I think it was I think it was South Africa Sevens rugby team as well. They arrived, they all tested negative at the airport, but somebody on their flight had tested positive. So they were all deemed as close contacts, and for the time being had to self-isolate. Their training schedule then is all thrown into disarray. So you've got the impact on those athletes themselves, but then you're also going to have the thing for example, 3 or 4 of the American players test positive. They have to pull out of the competition. You're then always going to have that asterisk next to the tournament of this team won, but the strongest team had to pull out. It could be 1, 2, 3 teams. Kyrgyzstan were here playing some men's qualifiers for the World Cup recently, and all 3 of their goalkeepers were ruled as close contacts of someone in the squad who'd tested positive, so they had to play 2 games with a defender in goal. And I think you run the risk as well of sort of calling the integrity of the competition into doubt as well. There's so many things hanging over it. So for the players, there's so many things going on. It's going to be so difficult, I think, for them to focus and really, give their best performances with everything going on in the background.
Yeah, definitely. And fingers crossed that, the whole games and the women's football tournament kind of go off without a hitch. It does feel like, something like that really, really could happen. But nevertheless, Sean, taken quite enough of your time this morning for me, not morning for you at the moment. But thanks so much for your insight. And, obviously, I kind of want Team GB to win, but I'd love to see Mana Iwabuchi come back to Arsenal with a gold medal around her neck. So, and obviously, like most football fans, always love watching the Japanese team. So best of luck to them as well, and enjoy covering the tournament.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for your time.
And that's all we've got time for this episode. Massive thanks to all 4 of our guests across these 2 parts. Anne-Marie Posma, Netherlands, Samantha Lewis, Australia, Rich J. Laverty of Team GB, and Sean Carroll with Japan. We really hope that you've enjoyed and valued the preview for the Olympics. I know for those of you who are watching the men's Euros, it feels a bit soon to be talking about another tournament, but personally I'm really looking forward to watching as many of these games as possible. Most of them kind of kick off in the morning in UK time, so I'm kind of looking forward to sitting down and watching some of those. I'm really interested in watching some of the teams that perhaps don't get to see that often nowadays, a bit like Japan. Actually a team I've got a huge amount of time for, and obviously we'll keep a very, very keen eye on Mana Iwabuchi, who will be kind of coming back, and she will be an Arsenal player this summer. That's all we've got time for this episode. Thanks so much for downloading, for listening, for feeding back, for retweeting, everything that you do to make this podcast reach more people, more ears. If you'd like to leave it a review on iTunes or wherever you leave your podcasts, that would be fantastic. Please specify that it's the Arsenal Women Arsecast that you're reviewing, so that makes its way to myself, Pippa and Alex. And really, really thank you. We will be back with another episode probably in a couple of weeks. We might kind of preview Arsenal's Champions League qualifiers, obviously that they'll be playing in Russia in August, and more towards the end of the transfer window. We'll probably do an episode just kind of previewing some of the new signings that Arsenal have brought in and will be bringing in with the people who know them best. Couple of Scandinavian players, I believe, in the crosshairs at the moment. So we'll probably do that once the market calms down a bit and we're closer to the end of the window. But until then, thanks so much. Hope you've enjoyed this episode, and goodbye.